A sudden slap at a gas station turned teacher Elijah Carter's quiet life upside down. When Lindsay Walsh, backed by her powerful family, assaulted him without provocation, she expected submission. Instead, she unleashed a reckoning. The viral video caught more than violence. It exposed the corruption beneath Maplewood's picturesque surface. As threats mounted and allies emerged, Elijah faced a choice: retreat into safety or stand firm against a system designed to silence him. The Walshes never imagined their perfect target would become their worst nightmare, not through retaliation, but through unwavering truth. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today and if you're enjoying these stories. Make sure you're subscribed. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the small town of Maplewood. Heat waves shimmered above the cracked asphalt of Jackson's Gas and Convenience, where Elijah Carter pulled his silver Accord into an empty pump. The air conditioner in his car had been working overtime, and the blast of humid heat that hit him as he stepped out made him wish he could have stayed inside. Elijah straightened his light blue-collared shirt and checked his watch. He was running a little early to his sister's place, which was a nice change. Being a high school history teacher meant his schedule was usually packed tight, but summer break had finally given him some breathing room. At 33, he valued these quiet moments of normalcy. Inside the store, a commotion was brewing. Through the large windows, Elijah could see a woman with highlighted blonde hair gesturing wildly at the cashier, her voice muffled but clearly raised. He shook his head slightly and turned his attention to the gas pump. Not his problem. Lindsay Walsh was having a terrible day, and everyone around her was going to know it. Her manicured nails tapped impatiently on the counter as she berated the young cashier. "I said I want to speak to the manager. This is the third time your pumps have overcharged my card," she insisted, though the receipt clearly showed the correct amount. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but the manager isn't here right now," the cashier, a college-aged kid with a name tag reading Tyler, replied. "I can take your information and have him call you." "Useless," Lindsay muttered, snatching back her credit card. She turned on her heel, designer sunglasses perched on her head, and stormed toward the door. As she pushed it open, the bell jingling angrily, her eyes landed on Elijah at pump number 4. "Figures," she said under her breath, just loud enough for an elderly couple nearby to hear. Something about the calm, composed way he stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other holding the fuel nozzle, irritated her beyond reason. That Lindsay's path took a sudden detour. Instead of heading straight to her white SUV, she walked between the pumps, phone suddenly in hand, and pointed vaguely in Elijah's direction. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying across the forecourt. "Do you always take up the whole area like that?" Elijah glanced around, confused. His car was perfectly positioned at the pump, with plenty of space on either side. He'd been through this routine before, random accusations from strangers who somehow felt entitled to question his very presence. After years of living in Maplewood, he'd developed a practiced response: polite disengagement. "Good afternoon," he said with a nod, turning back to the pump. This only seemed to infuriate Lindsay more. She stepped closer, her phone still held out as if recording. "I'm talking to you. You're blocking access," she insisted, though there were 3 other empty pumps available. That a teenager inside the store, Megan Reynolds, noticed the interaction and pulled out her own phone. Something about the woman's aggressive stance made her uneasy, and she began recording through the window. "Ma'am," Elijah said calmly, "I'm just getting gas, and then I'll be on my way. There's plenty of room for everyone." "Don't you ma'am me with that tone," Lindsay shot back, her voice rising. "You were looking at me funny when I came out. I saw you." A small crowd was forming now, the elderly couple, a truck driver on his break, and Tyler peering nervously through the store window. The heat seemed to intensify with the tension. Elijah sighed and replaced the nozzle. "I just want to pump gas and leave, ma'am. You're making a scene." The words had barely left his mouth when it happened. Lindsay's hand flew up, connecting with Elijah's cheek in a sharp, stinging slap that echoed across the gas station. The sound hung in the air for what felt like minutes. Inside the store, Megan gasped, her finger pressing the record button harder. The elderly woman covered her mouth in shock. The truck driver took a step forward, uncertain whether to intervene. Elijah's head had turned with the impact, a red mark already forming on his dark skin. For a moment, he stood frozen, processing what had just happened. Lindsay stood before him, eyes wild with a mixture of anger and something else, perhaps expectation. Maybe even hope that he would retaliate. Instead, Elijah straightened himself, looked her directly in the eyes, and said in a voice that carried across the suddenly silent gas station, "You just made a big mistake." Then he turned and walked, not to his car, but directly into the store. His steps were measured, his back straight, his dignity intact. Lindsay stood there, momentarily confused by his reaction. This wasn't how these confrontations usually went in her experience. The people she targeted typically either cowered or exploded, both reactions she knew how to manipulate. This calm determination threw her off balance. Inside the store, Elijah approached Tyler. "I need to speak with the manager," he said. "And I'd like a copy of your security footage, please." I don't think I can," Tyler stammered. "Then I'll need the corporate number and the store ID number," Elijah replied. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd be willing to make a statement about what you saw." Megan, still recording, stepped forward. "I got it all on video," she said, her voice slightly shaky but determined. "She hit you for no reason." "Thank you," Elijah said with genuine gratitude. "Would you be willing to share that with me?" Within an hour, Megan's video was uploaded to her social media accounts with the caption, "She slapped him for no reason. Watch his reaction." The short clip showed the exchange clearly: Lindsay's aggression, the unprovoked slap, and Elijah's dignified response. By the time Elijah reached his sister's house, the video had already been shared hundreds of times. His phone buzzed continuously, with notifications, but he silenced it. This wasn't how he'd planned to spend his afternoon, but he knew from experience that incidents like these required immediate documentation. "Elijah, what happened to your face?" his sister Amara asked. As soon as she opened the door, he touched his cheek, still tender from the slap. "Long story. Let's just say someone's having a worse day than they planned." Later that evening, as Elijah sat on his porch swing, the familiar sight of police cruisers turning onto his street made his stomach tighten. Two officers approached his house, their hands resting casually near their holsters. "Mr. Carter," the taller officer called out, "we need to speak with you about an incident at Jackson's gas station today." Elijah rose slowly. "Yes, officers. I was assaulted there this afternoon." The officers exchanged glances. "We received a complaint that you threatened a woman there," the second officer said. "Mrs. Walsh claims you lunged at her and made her fear for her safety." A bitter smile crossed Elijah's face. Of course she would twist the narrative. "I have video evidence of what actually happened," he said calmly. "Both from my dash cam and from a witness at the scene. I'd be happy to show you, but I'll be calling my lawyer first." The officer's demeanor shifted slightly at the mention of evidence and a lawyer. They'd clearly expected a different conversation. While this was happening, across town, Lindsay Walsh was furiously typing on her Facebook page. "Attacked at the gas station today by an aggressive man who lunged at me. Thank God I defended myself. Police are handling it now. This town isn't safe anymore." But unlike her previous posts, the comments weren't flowing with sympathy. Instead, links to Megan's video were appearing, along with comments like, "The video shows a different story," and "You slapped him first, Lindsay." Panic began to set in as Lindsay realized the narrative was slipping from her control. She called her brother, County Commissioner Ron Walsh, voice trembling with indignation. "Ronnie, I need your help. They're making me look like the bad guy online." As Lindsay scrambled to control the damage, Elijah received an unexpected message from Chantel Green, a local activist he'd met at community events but didn't know well. "Mr. Carter, I saw what happened today. My organization can offer legal and community support. This isn't the first time something like this has happened in our town, but with your help, it could be one of the last. Please call me when you can." Just as Elijah was considering whether to respond, his phone rang. An unfamiliar number with the local area code. "Mr. Carter? This is Sarah Jenkins from Channel 7 News. We've seen the video of your assault today, and we've been doing some background research on the woman involved. We've uncovered who she really is, and this goes way deeper than anyone thought. Would you be willing to speak with us?" Elijah looked out at the police cruisers still parked on his street, then back at his phone where notifications continued to pour in. Whatever peace he'd hoped for this summer had just evaporated. He took a deep breath and answered the call. "I'm listening," he said, The morning after the incident, Elijah sat in his living room, a mug of coffee growing cold beside him as he scrolled through news articles on his tablet. His face stared back at him from the screen, a still from Megan's video, captured just after the slap. The headlines varied from factual to sensational. Woman slaps man at local gas station. Video goes viral, to race and power collide at Maplewood pumps. But it was Channel 7's exclusive that caught his attention most: Walsh Family Connections, a history of buried complaints. As it turned out, Lindsay Walsh wasn't just any entitled woman with racial prejudices. She was Lindsay Parker Walsh, ex-wife of former Sheriff James Parker and sister to Ron Walsh, the current county commissioner. The station had uncovered a pattern of complaints against her over the years, all mysteriously dismissed or buried in bureaucratic red tape. There was the black teenage boy she'd accused of stalking her at the mall in 2018, charges dropped when security footage showed him simply shopping with his mother. The Hispanic landscaper she claimed had threatened her, who lost his business contracts before being cleared. And most recently, a black delivery driver who nearly lost his job after she called 911 claiming he was casing houses when he was simply checking addresses for a package. The phone rang, breaking his concentration. It was Chantel Green. "Mr. Carter, have you seen the news?" "I'm looking at it now," he replied, his voice tight. "This is bigger than a slap," Chantel said. "This is about a pattern that's been allowed to continue because of who she's connected to. I've arranged for you to meet with Marcus Bell this afternoon. He's the best civil rights attorney in the state, and he's willing to take your case pro bono." Elijah hesitated. He was a teacher, not an activist. He valued his privacy and quiet life. Getting involved in a public legal battle against one of the most powerful families in the county wasn't what he'd planned for his summer. "I just wanted to get gas," he said softly. "I know," Chantel replied, her voice gentle but firm. "But sometimes the moment chooses us, not the other way around." 3 hours later, Elijah sat in the modest offices of Bell Legal Advocacy Group, facing Marcus Bell across a desk cluttered with legal pads and case files. Bell was younger than Elijah had expected, maybe early 40s, with keen eyes that missed. "Nothing. Let me be clear, Mr. Carter," Marcus said after reviewing the video and police report. "This isn't just about a slap. This is about a systemic problem where certain people are allowed to weaponize their privilege against others with impunity. Mrs. Walsh has been doing this for years, and her family connections have shielded her from consequences." He slid a folder across the desk. "These are sealed complaints I managed to access. 3 in the last 2 years alone, all following the same pattern. She accuses, she escalates, she plays victim, and then her brother or ex-husband makes it go away." Elijah flipped through the documents, his stomach tightening. "So what happens now?" "Now," Marcus said, leaning forward, "we fight back. Assault. Charges against her, for starters. Then a civil suit for racial harassment and emotional distress. We make it too public, too costly for them to bury this time." Meanwhile, the town of Maplewood was dividing along predictable lines. Outside the courthouse, a small group of protesters held signs reading "Justice for Elijah" and "End Walsh Family Corruption." Across the street, a counter-protest had formed, mostly older residents holding "We support Lindsay" signs and "Don't rush to judgment." At First Baptist Church, Pastor William Thompson addressed his congregation. "We need to remember that Lindsay is a long-standing member of our community, a good Christian woman who's donated generously to our causes. There are always two sides to every story." But at Greater Hope AME Church across town, Reverend Jackson had a different message. "When a member of our community is attacked for simply existing in public space, silence is not an option. We stand with Brother Carter and demand justice." The division extended to social media, where locals took sides in heated exchanges. Long-simmering tensions in Maplewood were bubbling to the surface, exposing racial fault lines that many had pretended didn't exist. At Maplewood High School, where Elijah taught American history, Principal Donovan called him into his office on Monday morning. "Elijah," he began, not quite meeting his eyes. "In light of the media attention, the board thinks it might be best if you take a leave of absence. Paid, of course, just until things settle down." "You're suspending me for being assaulted?" Elijah asked incredulously. "Not suspending," Donovan corrected quickly. "A voluntary leave. For your own good." You know how these things can be a distraction for the students. Elijah sat very still, processing the implications. Who from the board suggested this? Donovan shifted uncomfortably. I'm not at liberty to say. It was a general consensus. Was Commissioner Walsh part of that consensus? Elijah pressed. The principal's silence was answer enough. That evening, as Elijah recounted the conversation to Marcus and Chantel at her community center office, his anger was palpable. They're trying to isolate me, he said. Make me disappear from public view. It's a classic intimidation tactic, Marcus agreed. And it won't be the last. They'll pressure anyone connected to you, employers, friends, family. As if on cue, Elijah's phone rang. It was his sister, Amara, her voice tight with anxiety. Elijah, someone left a note on my door. Her words tumbled out in a rush. It says, your brother should have stayed in his place. Now your family will pay. There's no signature, just those words printed out. The kids are scared. Elijah's hand tightened on the phone. Call the police. Document everything. Then pack a bag. You're staying with me tonight. After hanging up, he looked at Chantel and Marcus, his resolve hardening. They're going after my family now. Marcus nodded grimly. This is why we need to go big. File a civil suit not just against Lindsay, but against everyone enabling her. The police department that looked the other way, the county commissioner who used his influence to bury complaints, the gas station that apparently has a pattern of losing footage when certain people are involved. You want to sue the entire power structure of this town? Elijah asked. Sometimes, Marcus replied. That's what justice requires. While they strategized, 17-year-old Megan Reynolds was facing her own backlash. As the video she'd filmed went viral, her social media accounts were flooded with both support and vitriol. Some praised her for documenting the truth, while others, including classmates and their parents, accused her of trying to stir up trouble and making our town look bad. That evening, she went live on TikTok, her usually confident face streaked with tears, but her voice steady. I'm getting threats for posting a video of what actually happened, she said to the camera. But I won't take it down because everyone needs to see the truth. Mr. Carter, Elijah, didn't do anything wrong. He was just getting gas, being completely normal. She's the one who walked up to him. She's the one who started yelling. And she's the one who hit him. He didn't even raise his voice. She wiped her eyes. People keep saying we should hear both sides, but I was there. There aren't two sides to this story. There's what happened, and there's what she wants people to believe happened. The video quickly accumulated thousands of views, bringing national attention to the case and drawing support from civil rights organizations across the country. That as public pressure mounted, Commissioner Ron Walsh called an emergency meeting with Police Chief Thomas Brewer and Family Attorney William Stern. This is getting out of hand, Ron said, pacing the private room at Maplewood Country Club. The story's gone national. We need to contain this. The video makes it difficult, Stern admitted. Your sister clearly struck first. Then we need to change the narrative, Ron insisted. Find something on this Carter guy. A complaint from a student, a traffic violation, anything we can use to paint him as the aggressor. Chief Brewer shifted uncomfortably. Ron, we've known each other 20 years, but this is getting into dangerous territory. The department's already under scrutiny for how the officers approached him that night. Tom, need I remind you who supported your appointment? Ron's voice had an edge that made the chief fall silent. Find something, or create something. I don't care which. While the commissioner plotted, Marcus Bell was meeting with a former employee of the gas station who had reached out after seeing the news. I worked there last year, the young man explained nervously. This isn't the first time Mrs. Walsh has caused problems. 2 years ago, she accused a black delivery guy of threatening her in the parking lot. The manager took her into the office. They talked privately, and suddenly the security footage from that day was corrupted. Next thing I know, she's filing a police report and the delivery guy is getting questioned by cops. Would you be willing to testify to this? Marcus asked. The young man hesitated. I have to live in this town. So does Elijah Carter, Marcus reminded him. So does his sister and her children who are now getting threatening notes. Back at Chantel's community center, Elijah was helping organize a support rally when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. You need to see this. A friend. The email contained no message, just an attachment, a video file. When he opened it, Elijah's breath caught. It was security footage from Jackson's gas station, timestamped 2 hours before his arrival that day. It showed Lindsay Walsh walking around the forecourt with a man who appeared to be the station manager. She was pointing to specific spots, gesturing animatedly, and at one point, she even mimicked what looked like fear gestures, backing away from an invisible threat, hands raised defensively. She had planned the whole thing. "Chantel," Elijah called, his voice tight. "You need to see this." As Chantel watched the footage, her eyes widened. "This changes everything," she said. "This wasn't a random incident. This was premeditated." Elijah stared at the frozen image on his screen, Lindsay Walsh rehearsing her performance, planning to create a racial incident, counting on her target to react exactly as expected. But she had picked the wrong man. "Make sure everyone sees this," he said quietly. "Every news outlet, every social platform. The Walsh family has controlled the narrative in this town for too long." As night fell over Maplewood, the pieces were moving into place for a confrontation that would expose not just one woman's actions, but an entire system built to protect those in power while silencing those who dared to speak truth. Dawn broke over Maplewood with the town already buzzing. Overnight, the security footage showing Lindsay Walsh rehearsing her confrontation had spread like wildfire across social media platforms and news sites. Chantel's strategic leak had worked better than anyone anticipated. The video showed Lindsay walking around the gas station with the manager, Bill Thompson, pointing at camera angles and practicing what looked unmistakably like fear gestures. At one point, she even mimicked backing away from an invisible threat, her hands raised defensively before nodding to Thompson with a satisfied smile. Elijah watched the morning news from his living room, his sister Amara and her 2 children still asleep in the guest bedrooms. The news anchor's voice filled the quiet space. Shocking footage has emerged in the case that locals are now calling the Maplewood Slap. Security video appears to show Lindsay Walsh, the woman who accused Elijah Carter of threatening her, rehearsing the confrontation hours before it took place. Walsh, sister of County Commissioner Ron Walsh, has yet to comment on this new evidence. His phone rang. It was Marcus. "You seeing this?" the attorney asked without preamble. "Hard to miss," Elijah replied. "My face is on every channel. Public opinion has completely flipped," Marcus said. "We're getting calls from national civil rights groups offering support. The NAACP wants to file an amicus brief if we go to trial." "If," Elijah questioned. "They might try to settle now," Marcus explained. "Offer you money to make this go away." Quietly. "But I think we have a chance to do something bigger here. This isn't just about one incident anymore." Outside the Walsh family home, a crowd of protesters had gathered, their chants audible through the closed windows. Lindsay peered through the blinds, her face drawn and pale. "They're not leaving," she said to her brother Ron, who was pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear. "Just stay inside and don't talk to anyone," he snapped before returning to his call. "I don't care what it takes. Get that video taken down for copyright infringement, security violation, whatever. Just do it." But it was too late. The footage had been downloaded and reposted countless times. Local news stations were airing it on an hourly basis, and national outlets had picked up the story. The Maplewood Town Hall, Mayor Alan Peterson called an emergency press conference, desperate to get ahead of the crisis that was engulfing his town. "The incident at Jackson's gas station is being fully investigated," he assured the assembled reporters, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "We take allegations of racial bias very seriously in our community." A reporter from the Maplewood Gazette raised her hand. "Mayor Peterson, records show that the Walsh family donated heavily to your last campaign. Will you be recusing yourself from any involvement in this case?" The mayor tugged at his collar. "My relationship with the Walsh family has always been strictly professional." Next question. Another reporter jumped in. "Is it true that the gas station has been cited for health violations and shut down as of this morning?" Some are suggesting this is an attempt to restrict access to potential evidence. Before the mayor could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. His face tightened as he read it. "No further questions at this time," he said abruptly, stepping away from the podium. Meanwhile, at Jackson's gas station, yellow health department tape surrounded the property. A sign on the door read, "Closed by order of Maplewood Health Department. Violations pending review." Bill Thompson, The manager seen in the security footage with Lindsay had deleted all his social media accounts and wasn't answering his phone. 3 different news vans were parked across the street, reporters doing live stand-ups with the closed gas station as their backdrop. Inside Elijah's home, the atmosphere was tense but determined. Marcus had arrived with a stack of legal documents, and Chantel was coordinating with community activists on her laptop. Amara's children played quietly in the corner, picking up on the adults' serious mood. "We've filed the civil suit," Marcus announced, spreading papers across Elijah's dining table. "We're asking for $2.5 million in damages, naming Lindsay Walsh, Jackson's gas station, and the Maplewood Police Department as defendants." $2.5 million. Elijah repeated, his eyes widening. "The number needs to hurt," Marcus explained. "This isn't just about you getting compensation. It's about creating consequences severe enough that they won't be so quick to do this to someone else." Chantel looked up from her laptop. "The support rally tomorrow is expected to draw at least 300 people. We've got speakers lined up, including Reverend Jackson and representatives from 3 civil rights organizations." Elijah nodded, feeling the weight of what was happening. This had gone far beyond a personal incident. He had become a symbol, the face of a fight much larger than himself. "How's Megan doing?" he asked, thinking of the teenager whose video had started it all. "She's holding up," Chantel replied. "Her parents are supportive, but she's getting some backlash at school. Nothing she can't handle, though. That girl has spine." The conversation was interrupted by Elijah's phone ringing again. The caller ID showed Maplewood High School. "Mr. Carter," Principal Donovan's voice sounded strained. "The school board has called an emergency meeting regarding your situation. They're citing unprofessional conduct as grounds for review of your teaching contract." "Unprofessional conduct?" Elijah repeated, anger rising in his voice. "I was assaulted at a gas station on my personal time." "I understand that," Donovan said, sounding genuinely uncomfortable. "But the publicity is causing disruption, and some board members feel." "Which board members, specifically?" Elijah cut in. "The ones who take donations from Commissioner Walsh." There was a pause on the line. "The meeting is tomorrow at 4. You have the right to representation." After hanging up, Elijah relayed the conversation to Marcus and Chantel. "They're trying to fire me now," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Not surprising," Marcus replied. "They're attacking from all angles, your reputation, your livelihood. Classic intimidation strategy. We'll be ready for them," Chantel assured him, already typing furiously. "I'm alerting our network now. We'll pack that school board meeting with supporters." That evening, a local talk radio host known for conservative views took to the airwaves to defend Lindsay. "Let's not rush to judgment here, folks," he drawled. "Everyone's seen a few seconds of video, and suddenly this woman is being crucified. What you haven't heard is her side of the story. Lindsay Walsh has been diagnosed with PTSD from a previous assault. Her lawyer says she felt genuinely threatened by Carter's body language and reacted instinctively." Lindsay's newly hired defense attorney, Patricia Morrison, held her own press conference the following morning, positioning her client as a victim. "Mrs. Walsh suffers from post-traumatic stress following a home invasion 3 years ago," Morrison stated to the assembled press. When confronted with what she perceived as aggressive body language from Mr. Carter, she experienced a trauma response. This was not about race. It was about a frightened woman defending herself. The claim might have gained traction if not for what happened next. A former secretary from Commissioner Walsh's office anonymously released an audio recording to multiple news outlets. The recording featured Ron Walsh speaking to someone, presumably Chief Brewer. "Keep this quiet. Make sure the kid's video disappears. We've handled worse than this before." The recording went viral within hours, prompting calls for Commissioner Walsh's resignation. The County Ethics Committee announced an emergency meeting to review the situation. As tensions rose, so did the physical manifestations of anger. The morning of the school board meeting, Elijah emerged from his house to find his car windshield shattered, a brick lying on the driver's seat with a note attached, "Race traitor. Know your place." Police officers took photographs and filed a report, but Elijah could see in their faces that they were going through the motions. No one expected an arrest. The school board meeting that afternoon became a battleground. The small conference room was packed beyond capacity, with people spilling into the hallway. Signs supporting Elijah were prominently displayed, and when the board chairman tried to limit public comments, the crowd erupted in protest. Chantel had organized effectively. Parents, students, fellow teachers, and community activists spoke passionately in Elijah's defense. His teaching record was impeccable. Student testimonials highlighted his fairness and dedication. The attempt to frame the incident as unprofessional conduct crumbled under public scrutiny. In the end, the board voted 4-3 to take no action regarding Elijah's employment status, a victory that felt hollow given that the vote should have been unanimous. Outside the school, reporters swarmed Elijah for comment. "I'm grateful to everyone who spoke up today," he said carefully. "But the fact that my job was even in question shows how deep these problems run. This was never about professional conduct. It was about silencing me." The next morning brought news that the health department had abruptly lifted its closure order on Jackson's gas station. The timing was suspicious, coming just as Marcus had filed a motion to preserve all evidence at the location. When investigators from Marcus's firm arrived at the station, they discovered that the security system had been upgraded overnight. With all previous footage apparently lost in the transition, they're destroying evidence. Marcus fumed when he heard the news. This is obstruction of justice, plain and simple. But the Walsh family's damage control efforts were beginning to backfire. Each attempt to cover their tracks only fueled public outrage and added to the growing evidence of corruption. The civil case was fast-tracked due to the public interest, with a preliminary hearing scheduled just 3 weeks after the incident. Lindsay's deposition was set for the following Monday. On the Sunday night before her deposition, Lindsay sat in her attorney's office, rehearsing her responses. The stress of the past weeks showed on her face. Her normally perfect makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and she'd lost weight. "Just stick to the story," Patricia Morrison advised. "You felt threatened. You reacted out of fear, not malice. Don't volunteer any additional information." Lindsay nodded mechanically, but her confidence was clearly shaken. The public narrative had shifted dramatically against her. Former friends had distanced themselves. Even her church, once a reliable support system, had grown notably cooler toward her. "What if they ask about the security video? The one where I'm talking to Bill before it happened? We'll say you were discussing a previous incident at the station." Morrison replied smoothly. "Nothing in that video explicitly proves you were planning anything." The next morning, Lindsay arrived at the courthouse flanked by her attorney and brother. A crowd of protesters parted reluctantly to let them through, their chants echoing in the marble hallway. Inside the deposition room, Marcus Bell waited with Elijah and a court reporter. The tension was palpable as Lindsay was sworn in. For the first hour, she maintained her composure, sticking to her rehearsed answers about feeling threatened and reacting out of trauma-induced fear. But when Marcus began playing the security footage of her rehearsal with Bill Thompson, frame by frame, she began to falter. "Mrs. Walsh, can you explain why you're demonstrating what appears to be defensive postures in this footage? This is 2 hours before Mr. Carter arrived at the station. I told you, we were discussing a previous incident," she insisted, her voice rising. "A previous incident that required you to practice backing away in fear." Marcus pressed. "And can you explain this moment here, where you appear to be smiling and nodding after your rehearsal?" Lindsay's composure cracked. "You don't understand. People like him always get away with everything now. They come into our towns, take over our neighborhoods, and we're supposed to just accept it." The court reporter's fingers froze over her stenotype machine. Elijah sat perfectly still, his face betraying no emotion despite the blatant racism he'd just witnessed. "People like who, exactly, Mrs. Walsh?" Marcus asked quietly. Lindsay looked trapped, her eyes darting between Marcus and her own attorney. Patricia Morrison quickly called for a break, but the damage was done to in the hallway outside. Morrison berated her client. "What were you thinking? We had a strategy." "I'm tired of pretending," Lindsay shot back, her voice cracking with stress and anger. "He was never supposed to fight back. None of them are. That's not how this works." Unknown to either woman, a law clerk passing by overheard the exchange. By that evening, Lindsay's outburst had been added to the growing narrative of the case, further cementing public opinion against her. As the preliminary hearing approached, the evidence against Lindsay and her enablers continued to mount. Former victims of her false accusations came forward. records of dismissed complaints mysteriously reappeared. The pattern of corruption and racial targeting became impossible to ignore. The night before the hearing, Elijah stood on his porch, looking out at the news vans still parked on his street. What had started as a simple stop for gas had evolved into something that was changing his town, exposing long-buried prejudices and corrupt systems. "You holding up okay?" Chantel asked, joining him on the porch. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said quietly. "No one ever does," she replied. "But sometimes we're the ones who have to stand in the gap." Inside the house, Marcus was preparing his opening statement, determined that this case would become more than just a footnote in local history. It would become a reckoning. The courthouse steps were crowded with protesters, counter-protesters, and media from across the country as Elijah made his way inside for the first day of testimony. The preliminary hearing had established probable cause with such overwhelming evidence that the judge had fast-tracked the case, bypassing the usual delays. Inside the imposing courtroom, with its dark wood paneling and American flag, Elijah straightened his tie and took his seat beside Marcus. Across the aisle, Lindsay Walsh sat with her attorney, her brother conspicuously absent after being subpoenaed. In a separate ethics investigation, Judge Sarah Harmon, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense proceedings, called the court to order. The room fell silent as Marcus approached the podium for his opening statement. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice measured and clear. "This case is about more than a slap. It's about a system that allowed one woman's prejudice to go unchecked for years because of her family connections. It's about what happens when power corrupts justice, and about a man who finally said enough." When it was Patricia Morrison's turn, she painted Lindsay as a misunderstood woman whose actions had been distorted by media frenzy. "Mrs. Walsh is not on trial for the sins of her family," she insisted. "She is an individual who reacted out of genuine fear, however mistaken that fear might have been." The first witness called was Elijah himself. As he took the stand and was sworn in, he felt the weight of every eye in the courtroom. This moment wasn't just about him anymore. It represented something much larger for his community. "Mr. Carter," Marcus began, "please tell the court, in your own words, what happened at Jackson's gas station on June 15th. Elijah took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice steady but filled with quiet dignity. "I stopped for gas on my way to my sister's house. I was minding my own business when Mrs. Walsh approached me, filming with her phone and accusing me of blocking the pump, though there were several empty pumps available. When I remained calm and tried to de-escalate, she became more agitated. She slapped me without provocation." "And how did you respond to being assaulted?" Marcus asked. "I didn't hit back, if that's what you're asking," Elijah replied. "I told her she'd made a mistake and I went inside to report the incident and request security footage." "Why didn't you retaliate physically?" Marcus asked, though he knew the answer. Elijah looked directly at the jury. "Because that's what she wanted. That's what people like Mrs. Walsh expect, for us to react with anger, to fulfill their stereotypes. But more importantly, as a black man in America, I knew that if I had hit back, I would be sitting at a different table in this courtroom today." A murmur ran through the gallery. Several jurors nodded almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Carter," Marcus continued, "this wasn't the first time you've experienced this kind of treatment, was it?" "No," Elijah replied. "I've spent my life being followed. In stores, questioned about whether I belong in certain neighborhoods, watched by security guards when I shop. Most Black Americans have similar experiences. Usually, we stay quiet, we keep our heads down, we try not to make waves. What made this time different?" Elijah paused, considering. "She crossed a line from passive prejudice to physical assault. And I realized that by staying silent, I was allowing this behavior to continue, not just against me, but against others who might not have the resources to defend themselves." During cross-examination, Morrison tried to suggest that Elijah's body language had been threatening, that Lindsay's reaction, while excessive, was understandable given her past trauma. "Mrs. Walsh has a documented history of PTSD," Morrison stated. "Couldn't your presence, as a large man, have triggered her fear response?" Elijah remained composed. "I was pumping gas, standing still, speaking calmly. If my mere existence as a black man is considered threatening, then that's exactly the problem we're addressing in this courtroom. After Elijah's testimony, 17-year-old Megan Reynolds took the stand. Despite her youth, she carried herself with remarkable poise, though her nervousness was evident in the way she tucked her hair behind her ear repeatedly. Megan, Marcus began gently. Can you tell us what you witnessed at the gas station that day? I was inside the store buying a soda when I saw Mrs. Walsh yelling at Mr. Carter outside, she explained. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just standing by his car, pumping gas. She walked over to him and started filming and accusing him of things. I could tell something bad was going to happen, so I started recording on my phone. And what did you see happen next? She got in his face, yelling about him looking at her funny or something, which he wasn't. He was super calm, just trying to finish getting his gas. Then out of nowhere, she slapped him really hard across the face. Megan's voice wavered slightly. I couldn't believe it. And the crazy thing was, he didn't hit her back. He just said something to her and walked away. Why did you decide to share your video online? Marcus asked. Megan straightened in her seat. Because it wasn't right. And I knew if there wasn't video, people might not believe what really happened. People like Mrs. Walsh count on others looking the other way. During Morrison's cross-examination, she tried to suggest that Megan had edited the video or had missed preceding events that might have justified Lindsay's actions. You're quite the social media influencer now, aren't you? Morrison asked with thinly veiled condescension. This video certainly boosted your following. Megan's eyes flashed. I posted it because it was the truth. I've lost friends over this. I've gotten threats. Trust me, if I wanted attention, there are easier ways to get it. As the trial progressed, the evidence against Lindsay mounted. The security footage showing her rehearsing the confrontation was presented. Former victims of her false accusations testified about similar incidents. Bill Thompson, the gas station manager, initially tried to protect Lindsay but crumbled under cross-examination. Yes, she asked me to help her stage a confrontation, he finally admitted, staring at his hands. She said she was tired of those people taking over her town, and she wanted to make an example. I went along with it because her brother is Commissioner Walsh, and my business license renewal was coming up. The most damning testimony came from a surprise witness, Robert Johnson, a former employee of Jackson's gas station who had witnessed a similar incident 2 years earlier. Mrs. Walsh accused a black delivery driver of threatening her. Johnson testified. I saw the whole thing. He was just checking an address on a package. She called the police, claimed he lunged at her. When I told the manager I'd seen everything, and the driver did nothing wrong, he told me to keep quiet if I wanted to keep my job. The next day, he said the security tapes from that day were accidentally erased. As the evidence accumulated, Lindsay's defense began to collapse. Her lawyer looked increasingly desperate, objecting frequently and on increasingly flimsy grounds. The narrative of a traumatized woman acting out of fear had given way to the reality of a privileged individual who had repeatedly weaponized her connections against people of color. On the trial's fourth day, Marcus called for Commissioner Ron Walsh to be subpoenaed. Despite his attorney's efforts to quash the subpoena, Judge Harmon ordered him to appear. When Ron Walsh took the stand, his usual confidence had evaporated. The ethics investigation into his conduct had already forced him to take a leave of absence from his position, and the strain showed on his face. Commissioner Walsh, Marcus began. We have evidence of multiple instances where complaints against your sister were mysteriously dismissed or evidence disappeared. Can you explain your role in these coincidences? I object, Morrison called out. Commissioner Walsh is not on trial here. Your Honor, Marcus countered, the commissioner's actions are directly relevant to establishing a pattern of protected behavior that emboldened Mrs. Walsh and led to the assault on my client. Overruled, Judge Harmon stated firmly. The witness will answer the question. Ron Walsh shifted uncomfortably. I may have made some inquiries on my sister's behalf in the past. That's not unusual or illegal. Family members look out for each other. Inquiries, Marcus repeated. Is that what you call pressuring the police chief to dismiss valid complaints? Or threatening a gas station's business license if security footage wasn't erased? Walsh's face reddened. You're twisting things. Am I? Marcus produced a stack of emails. These communications between your office, the police department, and various businesses where incidents involving your sister occurred tell a different story. They show a systematic effort to cover up her behavior and intimidate her victims. As Walsh struggled to explain away the evidence, Elijah watched from his seat, a complex mix of emotions washing over him. There was satisfaction in seeing the truth exposed, but also a deep sadness that such corruption had been allowed to fester in his community for so long. That evening, after court adjourned, Chantel organized a town hall meeting at Greater Hope ME Church. The building was packed, beyond capacity, with people standing in the aisles and spilling out onto the steps outside. When Elijah took the podium, the crowd fell silent. He hadn't planned to speak, but something in him needed to address his community directly, outside the formal constraints of the courtroom. "I never wanted to be the face of this fight," he began, his voice soft but carrying through the church's excellent acoustics. "For most of my life, I've done what many of us do: keep my head down, don't make waves, tell myself that silence is safer." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "But there comes a point where silence becomes complicity, where keeping the peace means accepting injustice. The slap I received was just one moment, but it represents something much deeper. The expectation that we should accept mistreatment, that we should be grateful for being allowed to exist in spaces others take for granted." The room was utterly still, every person hanging on his words. This isn't just about me or about Lindsay Walsh. It's about a system that protected her because of who her family is, that dismissed complaints from those deemed less important. It's about the courage to say enough, not with violence, but with dignity and determination. By the time he finished speaking, many in the audience were openly weeping. The applause that followed was thunderous, a cathartic release of emotion from a community that had long felt unheard. The next morning, as Elijah prepared for another day in court, he turned on the television to see his own face looking back at him. A major network had run a special report titled "The Slap That Changed a Town," featuring interviews with community members, legal experts, and civil rights activists discussing the broader implications of the case. Mr. Carter's response has become a master class in dignified resistance, one commentator noted. He didn't return violence with violence. He used the system itself to demand accountability. By the fifth day of the trial, the jury had heard from all major witnesses. The evidence against Lindsay was overwhelming, and her defense had largely crumbled. As closing arguments approached, her legal team made a last-ditch effort to salvage the situation. "Mr. Bell," Morrison said, approaching Marcus during a recess, "my client is prepared to offer a substantial settlement to resolve this matter quickly and quietly." "How substantial?" Marcus asked, though his expression suggested he already knew his answer. $2 million, Morrison replied. "With a confidentiality agreement, of course. No admission of wrongdoing." Marcus looked to Elijah, who had overheard the conversation. Their eyes met in silent communication. "No," Elijah said firmly. "This was never about money. It's about accountability and truth. I want everything on the public record." Morrison's face tightened. "Your client is being unreasonable. This offer is generous." "My client," Marcus replied, "is being principled. And principle, Ms. Morrison, is something your client might want to familiarize herself with." As they prepared to return to the courtroom for closing arguments, a court clerk approached Judge Harmon's chambers with an envelope marked "Urgent, Suppressed Evidence." The source was unknown, but the timing couldn't have been more dramatic. The courtroom buzzed with speculation as the judge reviewed the contents in her chambers. When she returned, her expression was grave. "Counsel will approach the bench," she ordered. As Marcus and Morrison conferred with the judge, Elijah watched their expressions change, Morrison's face paling, Marcus's eyes widening in surprise. Whatever was in that envelope had changed. The game once again. The trial was about to take an unexpected turn. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Harmon returned to her seat, the mysterious envelope now open on her bench. Her expression was unreadable as she adjusted her glasses and addressed the packed room. "In light of new evidence that has just been presented to this court, we will take a 30-minute recess. Counsel for both parties will remain for discussion." In chambers, as the judge rose, the gallery erupted in whispers. Elijah looked questioningly at Marcus, who shook his head slightly. He knew as little as anyone else about what was happening. Inside the judge's chambers, Sarah Harmon spread the contents of the envelope across her desk. Emails, text messages, and what appeared to be internal memos formed a damning paper trail between Lindsay Walsh, her brother Commissioner Ron Walsh, and Bill Thompson, the gas station manager. These communications, Judge Harmon explained to the attorneys, detail explicit coordination to stage confrontations with people of color and then manipulate evidence afterward. The most recent exchange specifically mentions Mr. Carter by name, identifying him as a perfect target due to his position at the high school. Patricia Morrison's face had lost all color. Your Honor, we cannot verify the authenticity of these documents without proper. The documents include Commissioner Walsh's official email address and have digital signatures, the judge interrupted. Their authenticity can be verified by court-appointed experts. More importantly, they corroborate evidence already presented in this trial. Marcus Bell maintained his professional composure, but his eyes showed his shock at the extent of the conspiracy. Your Honor, we request that Commissioner Walsh be recalled to the stand immediately. Judge Harmon nodded. He will be. I'm also issuing a subpoena for all communications from his office for the past 3 years related to his sister or any incidents at Jackson's gas station. When court resumed, the atmosphere was electric. News of the mysterious envelope had somehow leaked, and reporters were frantically updating their stories outside. Commissioner Ron Walsh was called back to the stand, his attorney protesting futilely. Gone was the confident public official. In his place sat a man who sensed his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Commissioner Walsh, Judge Harmon began, unusual for a judge to lead questioning. I have before me emails from your county account discussing, and I quote, handling the Carter situation to protect Lindsay. Would you care to explain these communications? Walsh swallowed hard, his eyes darting to his attorney. I may have expressed concern about my sister's well-being after the incident. This email is dated 2 days before the incident, Commissioner. Judge Harmon replied, her voice sharp. You wrote, Lindsay says she's found another one who needs to be taught respect. Some teacher at the high school. I've told Bill to make sure the cameras are positioned right this time. A collective gasp rose from the gallery. Elijah felt a chill run through him. They had targeted him specifically, planned the whole thing in advance. Walsh's attorney jumped up. Your Honor, my client invokes his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. A wise choice, Judge, Harmon noted dryly. But rather late. Within hours, copies of the emails had somehow found their way to Chantel. No one questioned how she'd obtained them. What mattered was that by evening, screenshots were trending nationally, the final evidence needed to confirm what many had suspected all along. Meanwhile, the commissioner found himself surrounded by reporters as he tried to leave the courthouse. Commissioner Walsh, did you help orchestrate racial incidents to maintain power in Maplewood? Is it true you threatened business owners who wouldn't cooperate with your sister's false claims? Backed against his car, Walsh finally snapped. I didn't think it would go this far, he blurted out, immediately regretting his words. We just wanted to keep the family name clean. Lindsay has issues. I was trying to protect her. His partial confession was captured by a dozen cameras and became the lead story on evening news broadcasts across the country. The next morning, Bill Thompson, the gas station manager who had disappeared after his initial testimony, requested to return to the stand. His lawyer had apparently advised that cooperating fully might be his only chance to avoid serious charges. Mrs. Walsh came to me about once a month, he testified, his voice barely audible. She'd point out customers she didn't like, always Black or Hispanic, and create incidents. She told me exactly what to do with the security footage afterward. And why did you comply? Marcus asked. Thompson stared at his hands. The first time I refused, my station got hit with health violations, tax audits, everything. Commissioner, Walsh made it clear. Either I helped his sister or I'd lose my business. And what about the incident with Mr. Carter specifically? She came in that morning saying she'd found the perfect target, an uppity teacher who needs to be put in his place. Those were her words, not mine. Thompson added quickly. She rehearsed the whole thing, showed me exactly where to position the cameras. She specifically said, it'll look like he threatened me. She'd done this so many times before. I didn't think anything would be different. What was different this time? Marcus pressed. The kid with the phone, Thompson admitted. Megan. No one anticipated someone else would be filming. As Thompson's testimony continued, Lindsay Walsh sat at the defense table, increasingly isolated. Her attorney's attempts to object were overruled one after another. Earlier that morning, Patricia Morrison had formally requested to withdraw as counsel, citing ethical conflicts, but Judge Harmon had denied the request so late in the proceedings by lunchtime. The dominoes were falling rapidly. The superintendent of Maplewood School District issued a public statement. In light of recent revelations, the board has unanimously voted to reinstate Mr. Elijah Carter to his teaching position with full back pay and a formal apology. The board member who initiated the review of Mr. Carter's employment has resigned, effective immediately. As Elijah checked his phone during the lunch break, he saw dozens of messages from former students, colleagues, and community members expressing support. Among them was a particularly moving note from the principal. "Elijah, I should have stood by you from the beginning. I let fear of repercussions guide my actions instead of principle. I hope you can forgive me, but I'll understand if you can't. Either way, your classroom is waiting whenever you're ready to return." The afternoon session brought even more damning testimony as former neighbors and acquaintances of Lindsay came forward, describing years of racist comments and behaviors that had been overlooked or excused by the community. "She once told me she was keeping a list of suspicious people in the neighborhood," one former neighbor testified. "When I looked at it, it was just a list of every black or brown family on our street." Another witness, a former church friend, reluctantly admitted she would say things during Bible study like, "We need to pray for those people to know their place." When anyone questioned her, she'd remind us who her brother was. With each testimony, the picture became clearer. This wasn't about one incident or one woman's prejudice. It was about a system that had enabled and protected her, allowing her behavior to escalate because she believed there would never be consequences. As Elijah watched the proceedings, he felt strangely detached. The trial had taken on a momentum of its own, exposing rot that ran much deeper than he had imagined. Part of him wanted it to be over, to return to his quiet life of teaching history and visiting his sister on weekends. But another part understood that what was happening was itself history in the making. That evening, as Elijah returned home, he found another note in his mailbox. Unlike the threatening messages he'd received before, this one chilled him with its personal nature. "You don't belong here. You might have won the courtroom, but not this town." He showed the note to Marcus and Chantel, who had come to discuss the next day's proceedings. "We should inform the court," Marcus said, carefully placing the note in an evidence bag. "This is witness intimidation." "It's more than that," Chantel observed. "It's desperation. They're losing control of the narrative they've maintained for generations." The next morning brought an unexpected development. Lindsay Walsh, now clearly seeing the direction the case was heading, agreed to testify fully, but only if granted partial immunity to reveal everyone involved. Judge Harmon, after consultation with the district attorney, agreed to limited immunity related only to conspiracy charges, not for the assault itself or previous false reports. The courtroom was packed as Lindsay took the stand, her appearance dramatically different from the confident woman who had slapped Elijah just weeks before. Her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple blouse and skirt, her makeup minimal, her demeanor subdued. "Mrs. Walsh," Marcus began, "you've agreed to testify about others involved in a pattern of coordinated harassment. Let's start with who else, beyond your brother and Mr. Thompson, helped you target people of color in Maplewood." What followed was a litany of names that sent shockwaves through the community. Deputy Harold Jackson, who had falsified police reports, 2 school board members who had used their positions to pressure Elijah's principal, a clerk in the county records office who had lost complaint forms. It wasn't just about race, Lindsay admitted, her voice hollow. It was about power, about keeping certain people in their place, our place. That's what I was taught my whole life. And Mr. Carter specifically? Why target him? Lindsay looked at Elijah for the first time since the trial began. He was respected. Students looked up to him. Black parents were pushing to have him promoted to department head. My brother said he was becoming too influential. As she continued to name names and detail incidents, the full extent of the conspiracy unfolded. What had appeared to be isolated incidents of racism were revealed as part of a coordinated effort to maintain the social hierarchy that had benefited the Walsh family for generations. The morning after Lindsay's explosive testimony, an investigative Reporter from the state capitol released audio recordings of 911 calls Lindsay had made over the past 5 years. In call after call, she reported suspicious black men who were simply delivering packages, jogging through the neighborhood, or waiting for buses. "I've got another one casing houses on Maple Street," her voice said clearly in one recording. "Black male, hoodie, looking at houses. Send someone quick before he breaks in." The dispatcher's response was telling. "Is this Lindsay Walsh again? What's the man actually doing?" "He's walking suspiciously, looking at houses." "Ma'am, is he carrying anything?" "Approaching doors." "No, but I know what they're like. Just send someone." The call ended with the dispatcher sighing audibly. The pattern was clear: Lindsay repeatedly targeting black men for ordinary activities, expecting the police to respond to her fears rather than actual suspicious behavior. By noon, Deputy Harold Jackson, one of the officials named in Lindsay's testimony, had submitted his resignation. By evening, he was in custody, charged with falsifying police reports and evidence tampering in connection with a 2021 incident where Lindsay had accused a black college student of threatening her in a parking lot, the state attorney general announced. A formal investigation into systemic racial bias and abuse of power in Maplewood County, promising to review every case involving the Walsh family's influence over the past decade. For Elijah, the cascade of revelations brought conflicting emotions. There was validation in seeing the truth finally acknowledged, but also a deep weariness. The case had become all-consuming, transforming him from a private citizen into a reluctant symbol. "We need to talk about next steps," Marcus said during a strategy meeting at Elijah's home. "The civil case against Lindsay is essentially won, but now we have evidence to pursue deeper charges against everyone who was complicit: the deputy, the school board members, even some businesses that participated in the cover-ups. This could go on for years." Elijah sat quietly, considering. "How much more does this need to consume my life?" he asked finally. "Part of me wants to see every last person held accountable, but another part just wants to teach my students and live in peace." "That's a personal choice," Chantel said gently. "But remember, whatever you decide affects not just you. It affects everyone who's ever been targeted like this, but didn't have the resources or support to fight back." The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Elijah's shoulders. Before he could respond, his phone rang, another national news outlet requesting an interview. The story had captured the country's attention, becoming a focal point for discussions about privilege, race, and accountability. Meanwhile, support was pouring in from unexpected sources. Civil rights leaders had reached out offering assistance. Talk show hosts wanted to feature his story. Politicians from both parties were citing the case in speeches about justice reform. Elijah's inbox contained messages from across the country. People sharing similar experiences, parents thanking him for showing their children what dignity looked like in the face of hatred, teachers proud to call him a colleague. One evening, as the trial neared its conclusion, Elijah's sister Amara finally decided to speak publicly. At a community forum organized by Chantel, she took the microphone, her hands trembling slightly. "My brother has always been the calm one, the one who keeps his head down and works twice as hard," she began. "Our parents taught us that was the way to survive in a town like this. Don't make waves, be beyond reproach, never give them a reason." Her voice strengthened as she continued. "For years, our family has endured what people call microaggressions, though there's nothing micro about how they make you feel. The store clerks who follow our children around, the neighbors who call the police when we have family gatherings, the jobs we don't get despite being the most qualified." By the time she finished speaking about the daily reality of being black in Maplewood, many in the audience were in tears, including white residents who had never considered how their neighbors experienced the same town so differently. The judge's ruling, when it finally came, surprised no one. Lindsay Walsh was found guilty of assault, filing false reports, and conspiracy to commit civil rights violations. The civil case resulted in a substantial judgment against her, the police department, and the county. Commissioner Ron Walsh's fall was even more dramatic. A thorough search of county records uncovered evidence of misuse of public office, bribery schemes involving local businesses, and systematic obstruction of justice. The man who had ruled Maplewood from behind the scenes for decades was led from his home in handcuffs, His political career in ruins, A.S. Lindsay was escorted from the courtroom after sentencing. She passed close to Elijah. Leaning slightly toward him, she whispered, "You think this is justice? They'll come for you next." Elijah didn't respond, but her words lingered, a reminder that victories were rarely complete and prejudice didn't disappear with a court ruling. In the aftermath, Maplewood began the slow, uncomfortable process of confronting its history. Town hall meetings became heated forums for discussions about race and privilege that had been avoided for generations. Some residents resisted, clinging to the comfortable myth of a harmonious community that had never really existed. Others embraced the opportunity for genuine change. For Elijah, the return to teaching brought both challenges and rewards. Some parents withdrew their children from his classes, unwilling to accept the new reality. But many more expressed support, and his classroom became a space for honest conversations about history and justice. One afternoon, as he was grading papers in his classroom after school, a custodian delivered a large envelope that had been left at the front office. "No return address," the man noted. Security checked it, just papers inside. Alone in his classroom, Elijah opened the envelope to find a stack of documents, internal memos, emails, and handwritten notes dating back decades. They detailed a systematic effort by town leaders, including several Walsh family members, to maintain racial segregation in housing, employment, and education long after such practices had been legally abolished. A simple note was paperclipped to the front. "There's more where this came from. The question is, are you still fighting or are you done?" Elijah stared at the documents, feeling the weight of history, both the town's and his own, pressing down on him. The slap that had started this journey had exposed more than one woman's prejudice. It had cracked open the foundation of a system built on inequality and silence. He gathered the papers and placed them back in the envelope. Elijah knew the real work was just beginning. The court case might be over, but the fight for true justice would require more than legal victories. It would require the courage to keep speaking truth, even when that truth was painful to hear. Outside his classroom window, he could see students crossing the courtyard, laughing and talking in mixed groups that would have been unusual just months before. Small changes, perhaps, but meaningful ones. Elijah picked up his phone and called Marcus. "Those deeper charges you mentioned," he said, his decision made. "I think we need to pursue them after all. Some fights are worth having, no matter how long they take." 3 months had passed since the trial concluded. Autumn had transformed Maplewood, painting the trees in brilliant reds and golds that matched the town's new energy. For Elijah Carter, the change of season seemed fitting, a visual reminder that nothing remained static forever, not even the deeply entrenched systems of a small southern town. Sitting at his desk one evening, a leather-bound journal open before him, Elijah reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple stop for gas. His pen moved across the page in careful script. "It wasn't the slap that broke me. It was the lifetime of moments before it, the indignities swallowed, the comments ignored, the constant awareness of being watched, judged, tolerated, but never fully accepted. What finally broke wasn't my resolve, but my silence." He paused, looking out at the golden hour light filtering through his window. The media attention had finally begun to wane. The last news van had left his street 2 weeks ago. He could almost taste the return of normalcy, though it was a new normal, different in ways both subtle and profound. The next morning, Elijah found himself driving a familiar route. Without fully planning to, he turned into Jackson's gas station. The place had reopened under new management after Bill Thompson pleaded guilty to evidence tampering and lost his business license. The sign now read, "Maplewood Fuels and Market," and the convenience store had been renovated. Elijah pulled up to Pump 4, the same one where it had all happened. He sat in his car for a long moment before getting out. The sensation was surreal, like revisiting the scene of a dream. As he stood there, fuel nozzle in hand, a young black boy around 10 years old walked by with his mother. The boy stopped, staring at Elijah with undisguised recognition. "You're the guy who stood up," he said simply. Elijah nodded, unsure how to respond. "My dad showed me the video," the boy continued. "He said sometimes not hitting back is stronger than hitting." "Your dad sounds like a wise man," Elijah replied, his throat tight with unexpected emotion. The boy's mother gave Elijah a smile of quiet solidarity before gently guiding her son toward the store. The brief exchange left Elijah shaken in a way that national news interviews hadn't. Somehow, in this child's recognition, the weight of what had happened, what was still happening, landed with new clarity. That afternoon, Elijah met Chantel at her community center. The space had been transformed in recent months, now housing the headquarters of what they'd named the Carter Stand Fund, an initiative to provide legal support for victims of racial injustice in small communities. "We've already got 3 cases. We're supporting," Chantel explained, showing him the renovated office space. "People who might never have come forward before are finding their courage. It's still strange seeing my name attached to this," Elijah admitted, looking at the simple logo, a silhouette of a person standing straight-backed, dignified. "Your name has become synonymous with something important," Chantel replied, "standing your ground without stooping to their level. It resonates with people." As if to confirm her point, Elijah's phone rang, an unfamiliar New York number. It was the 3rd publishing house to contact him that month. "Mr. Carter, I'm Jordan Phillips from Horizon Publishing. We'd like to discuss the possibility of you writing a book about your experience. We believe your story needs to be told in your own words." His initial instinct was to decline, as he had with the previous offers. He was a history teacher, not an author or activist. But before he could formulate his usual polite refusal, he remembered the boy at the gas station. "I'd consider it," he said instead, "but only if the focus isn't just on me. This story is about a community, a system, and all the people who've faced similar situations without cameras capturing their moment." The publisher agreed enthusiastically, and by the time Elijah hung up, he had a tentative meeting scheduled for the following week. "You're going to do it?" Chantel asked, having overheard his side of the conversation. "I think so," he replied, surprising himself. Some stories need to be documented, even if living through them once was enough. Changes were rippling through Maplewood in ways both structural and symbolic. The special election to replace Commissioner Walsh had resulted in the first Black woman ever elected to the county commission. The school board now included 2 Hispanic members and an Asian American parent, diversity that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Elijah observed these changes with cautious optimism. He knew better than most that progress wasn't linear, and that backlash often followed advancement. The threatening notes had stopped, but he still checked his rearview mirror more often than he used to, still tensed slightly when police cars passed him on the street. One evening, a local news website published a leaked recording from Lindsay Walsh's prison interview. Her voice, once so confident and entitled, now carried a bitter edge. "I just wanted him to feel small. They always do. They're supposed to back down, apologize, go away. That's how it's always worked." The interviewer asked if she regretted her actions. "I regret getting caught," she replied with startling honesty. "This town worked a certain way for generations. I played by those rules. Now suddenly the rules have changed, and I'm the one who pays the price." Elijah listened to the recording once, then closed his laptop. There was nothing surprising in her words, no revelation that changed his understanding. Just the same entitlement, now tinged with the resentment of someone facing consequences for perhaps the first time. The following week brought unexpected news for Marcus Bell. His work on Elijah's case had caught the attention of the State Bar Association, which had nominated him for a seat on the newly formed State Ethics Committee, established to address systemic inequities in the legal system. His acceptance speech, Marcus acknowledged the significance of the moment. This appointment wouldn't have happened without the courage of ordinary people who refused to accept injustice as inevitable. People like Elijah Carter and Chantel Green, who showed us that standing up doesn't always mean fighting back. Sometimes it means standing firm in your dignity and truth. The recognition of his name brought applause from the audience, but Elijah, watching the live stream from his classroom, felt only a quiet sense of purpose. The attention had never been what motivated him. It had always been about something more fundamental, the right to exist in public space without fear or apology. After months of administrative leave, Elijah's first day back in the classroom arrived. He'd been offered a promotion to department head, the very position that had apparently threatened the Walsh family's sense of proper hierarchy, but had declined for now, preferring to focus on teaching. As he entered his classroom that morning, He was startled by spontaneous applause from his students. They rose from their desks, clapping and cheering as he set his briefcase down at the front of the room. Momentarily speechless, Elijah raised a hand to quiet them. "Thank you," he said simply. "But today isn't about me. It's about getting back to history, which, as you've all witnessed firsthand, isn't just something that happens in textbooks." One student, a quiet girl who rarely spoke in class, raised her hand. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to say, I want to be like you one day. Someone who doesn't just take it." The simple statement, delivered with teenage earnestness, moved Elijah more than any news interview or national recognition had. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me," he replied, his voice slightly rough with emotion. That weekend, Chantel organized a community event at the renovated park downtown. What had begun as a small gathering to unveil a mural painted by local artists had evolved into something larger, a celebration of change and a commitment to continued progress. The mural itself was striking, Elijah's silhouette surrounded by raised hands of various skin tones, protest signs, and the words "Dignity is non-negotiable" arching across the top. Elijah felt self-conscious seeing his form immortalized in such a public way, but he understood the symbolic importance it held for others. As the autumn sun began to set, casting long shadows across the gathered crowd, Chantel stepped up to the microphone. "A year ago, many of us believed change was impossible here," she began. "We'd accepted that some voices mattered more than others, that some people could act with impunity while others had to walk on eggshells. What we've learned through Elijah's stand is that systems only have the power we give them through our silence and compliance." The crowd applauded, and Elijah found himself nodding along with her words. It was true. The most insidious aspect of the system that had protected Lindsay Walsh wasn't the corruption itself, but the community's resigned acceptance of it as unchangeable. When it was Elijah's turn to speak, he kept his remarks brief. "This mural isn't really about me," he said, gesturing to the artwork behind him. "It's about all of us, our collective decision to expect better, to demand better from our community and from each other. The work isn't finished. It's barely begun. But for the first time in a long time, I believe it's possible." As he stepped away from the microphone, the sense of unity in the park was palpable, a community breathing together in a moment of collective hope. Later that evening, checking his mailbox before heading inside, Elijah found a plain white envelope with no return address. His stomach tightened instantly, memories of threatening notes still fresh. Inside was a single photograph, a shot of him from behind, taken that very day at the abandoned gas station. The implication was clear. He was still being watched. The victory wasn't complete. Perhaps it never would be. Spring came to Maplewood, bringing new growth and renewed energy. Almost a year had passed since the incident that had transformed both Elijah's life and the town itself. Cherry blossoms lined Main Street, their delicate petals occasionally catching in the breeze and swirling like pale pink snow. Elijah stood in a bookstore on that same street, looking at a display in the front window. His own face looked back at him from the cover of The Slap That Spoke Louder, published just 2 weeks earlier and already on several bestseller lists. The process of writing had been both cathartic and challenging. With the help of a skilled editor, he'd woven his personal experience into a broader examination of power, race, and the courage to break cycles of injustice. The book was unflinching in its honesty, refusing to simplify complex realities or offer easy answers. "Excuse me, are you him?" The author, a middle-aged white woman, approached, holding a copy of the book. Elijah nodded, still uncomfortable with being recognized. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "My husband and I, well, we were on the wrong side of this at first. We believed what we were told about you. Your book made us see things differently." The woman's candor was unexpected, and Elijah found himself genuinely touched. "That means a lot. Thank you for being willing to reconsider." As she walked away, his phone rang. It was his literary agent, Caroline. "Great news," she said without preamble. "Valiant Studios wants to option your book for a film. They're offering a substantial sum and creative consultation rights." Elijah sat down on a nearby bench, momentarily overwhelmed. "A movie? I don't know, Caroline. I'm not sure I want to relive this all over again on screen." "I understand," she replied. "But think about the reach it could have. Your story has already changed minds. Imagine how many more people it could impact. After a thoughtful pause, Elijah responded, I'll consider it, but I have one condition: no hero narrative. Just truth. The messy, complicated reality of what happened and why it matters. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Bell was working with a tech team he'd hired to trace the mysterious photograph Elijah had received months earlier. The investigation had been painstaking, but they'd finally made a breakthrough. The photo was uploaded from an IP address belonging to a local group called Heritage Preservation Society, the tech specialist explained. It's a front for white nationalist activities. Same people who sent the earlier threats. Marcus nodded grimly. I thought as much. Send everything to my contact at the FBI. This crosses into hate crime territory now. The federal investigation moved quickly, resulting in arrests of several local men connected to the white nationalist group. The same organization, it turned out, had been behind threatening letters sent to other black residents and businesses in Maplewood and surrounding counties. The FBI's involvement brought a new level of scrutiny to the region. Agents interviewed dozens of people about patterns of harassment and intimidation that had gone unreported or uninvestigated for years. What had begun with Elijah's case was expanding into a broader examination of systematic discrimination throughout the area. The Carter Stand Fund, meanwhile, had grown beyond Chantel and Elijah's initial vision. Now supporting over 30 racial justice cases across the southern states, it had become a respected resource for communities facing similar struggles. Major civil rights organizations had contributed funding and legal expertise, transforming a local initiative into a regional force for change. Elijah remained involved but kept a lower profile, preferring to support from behind the scenes while focusing on his teaching and writing. His sister Amara had taken a more active role, discovering a talent for organizing and advocacy that had surprised even her. One crisp morning in May, Elijah stood with hundreds of other Maplewood residents as the town swore in its first black mayor. Frank Williams, a retired school principal, had won in a landslide, riding a wave of enthusiasm for new leadership untainted by connections to the old power structure. A.S. Williams took the oath of office. Elijah stood beside him on the platform, a symbolic presence representing the change that had made this moment possible. The new mayor had asked him personally, and though Elijah had been reluctant to step into the spotlight again, he recognized the importance of visible representation. This day belongs to all of us, Mayor Williams said in his inaugural address. To everyone who refused to accept that things couldn't change, who worked and hoped and believed in a better Maplewood. Our diversity isn't a threat to our community, it's our greatest strength. The crowd erupted in applause, a sound that seemed to wash away the last echoes of Lindsay Walsh's hateful words. Later that week, news came that Lindsay had been denied parole after her first hearing. The parole board cited her lack of genuine remorse and continued failure to acknowledge the racial motivation behind her actions. A local reporter managed to get a brief statement from her through her attorney. I'm being sacrificed to appease the media and political correctness, she claimed. This town will regret turning its back on people like me. Her bitter prophecy fell flat in a community that had moved forward without her. The Walsh name, once synonymous with power and influence, now carried the taint of exposed corruption and bigotry. That on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Elijah drove to the small cemetery where his parents were buried. He hadn't visited since before the incident, somehow never finding the right moment. Now, with spring flowers dotting the carefully maintained grounds, it felt like time. He placed a bouquet of fresh lilies on the shared headstone, then carefully set down a copy of his book beside them. I finally spoke up, he said softly to the granite marker. I hope you're proud. He stayed for almost an hour, telling them about everything that had happened, not just the public events, but the private moments of doubt, fear, and ultimately, resolve. Though they'd been gone for years, he felt their presence strongly, their lifelong example of quiet dignity and persistence having shaped his own response when tested. The following week brought a surprise visit to Elijah's classroom. Megan Reynolds, the teenager whose video had sparked it all, had returned to Maplewood after her first year of film school. I'm making a documentary, she announced, her confidence grown since he'd last seen her, about how one moment can change a community. It's for my final project, but I'm hoping it might get into some festivals. That's wonderful, Elijah replied with genuine enthusiasm. Your video changed everything. Without it, none of this would have happened. Megan shook her head. The video just showed what happened. You're the one who decided to stand up instead of letting it get buried like all the other incidents. That's what made the difference. Her first short film, titled Silence Isn't Peace, would go on to win a Student Documentary Award and launch her career as a filmmaker committed to stories of social change on the anniversary of the incident. Elijah found himself driving across town to a different gas station, this one now community-owned, part of a cooperative business initiative started by Mayor Williams to create economic opportunities in previously underserved neighborhoods. He filled his tank, lost in thought about how much had changed in a year. He noticed an elderly white woman struggling with her balance as she stepped out of her car at the next pump. Without hesitation, he moved quickly to her side, catching her arm as she stumbled. "Oh," she exclaimed, startled but grateful. "Thank you. These new knees aren't quite as reliable as advertised." "Happy to help," Elijah replied with a genuine smile. Their brief interaction, unremarkable in its ordinariness, struck him as profoundly significant. This, perhaps, was the true measure of progress, not grand gestures or public recognition, but the simple ability to exist in shared spaces with mutual respect and basic human kindness. As he drove away, Elijah reflected on the journey that had brought him here. It had never been about hitting back, violence answering violence in an endless cycle. It had been about standing up, about refusing to accept that dignity was negotiable or that justice was a privilege rather than a right. The road ahead remained long and uncertain. Change, he had learned, was neither linear nor guaranteed. But as the spring sunshine warmed his face through the car window, Elijah felt something that had been absent for too long in Maplewood. Hope. Not just for tolerance, but for true belonging. In his rearview mirror, the gas station grew smaller, a place now notable not for conflict, but for an ordinary moment of connection. The slap that had been heard around town had faded into history, but its echoes continued to reshape the community in ways both subtle and profound. It was, Elijah thought, a fitting legacy, not the sound of conflict, but the quieter, more powerful resonance of people finally being seen. What would you have done if faced with injustice? Retreat into silence or stand in your truth like Elijah? If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share to support more powerful narratives that challenge us all to examine the courage within.